Show them who we are.
Black Panther Wakanda Forever is finally out in theaters after a lot of anticipation and just as much debate. Ryan Coogler once again took the directing chair for this. He also co-wrote the movie, and the principal cast of the first one returned, minus one key member. I do not envy Ryan Coogler in making this movie. He was dealt an awful hand. He finished the script for this movie, and then just days later found out that the lead and one of his best friends had tragically passed away. And then he had to rewrite the entire thing from scratch, and in what I believe to be a stroke of pure genius, he decided to take the real-life grieving that everyone was going through and put it in the story and center the movie around it. This movie is a 2-hour and 41-minute tribute to Chadwick Boseman. Because Boseman's not here, and the movie centers around the side characters and all of them grieving and dealing with this new political turmoil coming in, at certain times the movie doesn't feel like a sequel, because the first one was this big action adventure movie, whereas this one is a much more grounded character drama dealing with grief and life and legacy. Shout out to Letitia Wright. She went to bed one night as a side character and woke up the next morning as the lead actress. Shuri's T'Challa's sister. She was T'Challa's best friend. They had a super close bond. They were almost inseparable. And so the movie puts her front and center, and she gets to do a lot of the emotional heavy lifting of this film. She held the audience's emotions in the palm of her hand. Whenever she was sad, I was sad. Whenever she was happy, I was happy. Whenever she was angry, I was pissed off. She is a phenomenal actress, and she was one of the standouts in a movie that had Angela Bassett and Lupita Nyong'o. And it helped her become one of my favorite MCU characters. After this movie, I can safely say Shuri's a top 3. Well, maybe top 5. No, I'm going to stick with top 3. I loved everything they did with Shuri. She goes on a hell of a journey in this movie. She was a hell of a character. And it's just, I mean, shout out Letitia Wright. She deserves a special shout out. But let's talk about Angela Bassett. There's a good chance she's getting an Oscar nomination for this film. I almost cried watching the movie a couple times, but I'd say one of the moments that almost took me over the edge was this line from the trailer.
I am queen of the most powerful nation in the world, and my entire family is gone.
And then you've got Lupita Nyong'o coming back as Nakia. I wouldn't say she was better than the first film. I'd say she was just as good. I kind of wish they gave her a bit more to do in the story, but she is a pretty important character in this movie. You've got Danai Gurira as Okoye, who gets a lot more to do in this and was much better than in the first one, that she was already amazing in. And Okoye did provide some moments of levity, but who really provided the moments of levity was Winston Duke's M'Baku, but he's not in the movie as much as I would have liked. I was actually surprised with how little he was in it, considering there was a big article that broke that he got, a bigger role in this movie, but it almost feels like this is what his role would have been if Chadwick Boseman was still with us. But he was definitely the comic relief of this film. He provided the most laughs, the most moments of levity in the situations of sadness. His jokes are so perfectly timed. That's something this movie does. It doesn't ruin scenes with jokes. The jokes work. It makes sense when they happen. They help the story, or in certain moments, they just provide a moment of levity when the audience needs it. Something as simple as M'Baku walking into a room eating a carrot, which he does in this movie, at a time of just not happiness. And it helps. Then there's Namor, played by Tenoch Huerta. All eyes are kind of on this guy. Because Namor, one of the oldest comic characters, everyone was looking forward to seeing Namor on screen, and everyone's excited to see how Ryan Coogler would pull him off. And I call him Namor, but he calls himself Namor, They say both in the movie. I think Namor makes more sense because of there's a reason he's called Namor, and if it's Namor, it doesn't work as well. But you can say either. Tenoch Huerta says Namor, Angela Bassett says Namor, just whichever you want. But I'm going to try to stick with Namor, because to my knowledge, that's his canon pronunciation. Phase 4 has been pretty consistent with villains. I think it's something this phase has done very well. They've had a few duds, like director Dick Wad Hayward, Carly, whoever the chick's name is in Miss Marvel. But for the most part, I've actually really liked Phase 4's villains. I don't think Agatha's that great, but she stands out enough to earn a spot on the list. U.S. Agent, Green Goblin, Scarlet Witch, Arthur Harrow, Wen Wu, all some great villains. And Namor goes right up there with them. Namor was compelling, and there were actually times that I thought he might be right. Ryan Coogler does not refer to him as a villain, and I understand why. At no point in the movie did it feel like Namor was a bad guy. The term antagonist really is the right word, because that doesn't mean villain, it just means opposition, which is what Namor is. All he cares about is keeping his people safe, which is such a simple motivation, but it works so well. Worked for Magneto, works here. He did give me Magneto vibes a lot, which, I mean, Magneto is one of my favorite comic book characters, and I'm going to argue still to this day the best Marvel villain we've seen on screen. So getting Magneto vibes from Namor, perfect. And they changed the name of his kingdom from Atlantis to Talokan, which is for more than just copyright reasons. There's a reason it's called Talokan. There's a reason it embraces Mesoamerican culture. And it's actually quite a beautiful story in the movie when you see it as to how it came to be. And I don't want to compare it to Atlantis because they're not the same, but I'm going to anyway because that's inevitable. Atlantis looked really cool, but at no point did it feel like Atlantis was a certain thing besides just, its own thing. Whereas Talokan has a reason for being the way it is, which I adore that they did that. There is so much Talokan, Talokanil, I can't remember what they call the people, but I think it's Talokanil. There's so much Talokanil history and lore wrapped up in this movie. And I would say that Letitia Wright, Angela Bassett, and Tenoch Huerta are the standout performances of this movie. They stole the show, in my opinion. Anytime they were on screen, I don't think I've ever been this sucked into a Marvel thing in a while than when they were given their stuff. There's a monologue Namor gives at one point, and you're just locked in, and I'm like, oh my god, I love this guy. The film does also introduce the character of Ironheart, played by Dominique Thorne, and this was my main concern going into the film. It seemed like Ironheart was going to be shoehorned in just so they could promote her show, because that kind of seems to be a trend with Marvel stuff nowadays. And that was my main worry. I was like, they're going to devote too much screen time to this character who doesn't need to be in this movie. But luckily, Ryan Coogler weaves her in a way that makes a lot of sense for the story. She's there for a bigger reason than just to promote her show. She has to be in this movie. It's crucial that she's in this movie. And she has big importance to this story. It doesn't take away from Shuri and Okoye and Ramonda and that whole realm over there. It just adds it in and gives them another person to their squad and someone else who can kick ass. There's a fight scene with Okoye, Shuri, and Riri that I adored. It was a cool fight. And as touched on, a lot in this movie. In terms of story, there is so much going on in this movie. It's 2 hours and 41 minutes long, and it's got so many plot lines I can't get into because of spoilers, but you just have to think of it in terms of Ryan Coogler took what was originally in Black Panther 2, because he said he implemented a lot of that script, so he took what he had originally written, modified it a bit, and then tossed in the death of Chadwick Boseman, and so it really beefs this thing up. But that all leads to my main issue with this movie, is it is too damn long, and it's so easy to cut stuff out. I've seen this movie once, and I know exactly what I would take out of this movie to trim about 15 minutes off the runtime, and I think it would help. There's a subplot in this movie that has a bearing on the initial plotline, on the plotline initially, But it feels like, as the movie drags on, this subplot and this character that we're following for it, who's not even in Wakanda, it's a character off doing their own thing somewhere else, but is kind of communicating with them. It feels like that was where they put in the obligatory MCU shit. And they just took away from the cool Wakanda stuff to give it to this guy. And I'm like, just keep it in Wakanda and take it out. Because the pacing of this movie can get rough. They needed to tighten it up a little more. The script is written super tight. I mean, if you go back through this movie, basically every element kind of interweaves together in a very essential way. And Ryan Coogler and Joe Robert Cole, the co-writer, wrote it so tight, but it does not feel edited tight at all. It feels like it's too long. The second act feels like it drags a bit. There's a moment where it feels like there's one group of characters who aren't doing anything because they're waiting for another group of characters to start doing something. And you just kind of have people sitting there chatting, waiting for their turn to go do cool stuff. And I started to like feel the length of it, and I was like, oh my god, can we just like get back into Wakanda already? Like, you're losing me here. The movie didn't feel like 2 hours and 41 minutes. There was a moment in the movie where I was like, oh, we probably still got like an hour left. But we are coming up on the third act. So it didn't feel as long as it was, but it still felt too long. And that's not just because I spent the entirety of the third act having to pee. Speaking of the third act, I didn't really like it. There was a part of it I loved. But the majority of the third act I was pretty underwhelmed by, mainly because there's this big kind of high stakes story, and the third act starts and I'm sitting there and I'm like, this is the final battle? Remember how the first Black Panther, the civil war for the country, consisted of about 24 people? It kind of feels like that again. There's a moment where they show a shot of people fighting, and I'm like, there's like 6 good guys fighting like 20 bad guys right now. And it just didn't feel that exciting. So in my opinion, the Black Panther films are 0 for 2 on their final battles, but in terms of the other action in this movie, it's pretty hit or miss. There are some incredible action set pieces, one of which I'm going to talk in depth, or 2 of which I'm going to talk in depth about in my spoiler review. And then there were a couple lackluster action sequences. But for the most part, I will say Ryan Coogler got better at filming Black Panther action. He utilizes slow-mo in a great way with the Tal O'Keefe that I would never have thought of, but it's a stroke of genius. But there wasn't a fight scene anywhere in this movie that was nearly as good or memorable as the Korea chase scene in the first film. That sequence is amazing from start to finish, and we don't get anything anywhere close to that in this movie. I don't want to say I was disappointed in Wakanda Forever, because I think the movie was good. I think Ryan Coogler did the best he could with what he had, but considering this movie was hyped up to be like the friggin' second coming of Christ, and one of the most important movies Marvel's ever done, and one of the best things Marvel's ever done, when it didn't feel like that, you can't help but feel slightly underwhelmed with the final product. But this movie was still good. It's one of the stronger entries in Phase 4, and I'm going to be ranking all the Marvel films here pretty soon, and I'm really interested to see where Wakanda Forever is going to fall. So I'm going to give Black Panther Wakanda Forever a B. For Black Panther. I think that's the same grade I gave the first film. Gotta love consistency. Alright guys, there's my review for Black Panther Wakanda Forever. My spoiler review will be out here pretty soon, hopefully in a couple days. I think I'm going to need an extra day to sit on the movie because it's a lot to process. It's not like some of these other Marvel movies where it's watch it, cool, move on. This is very much a thought-provoking film from beginning to end, and I definitely need more time to think about it before I'm ready to talk spoilers. So that'll hopefully be up here in a couple days. But if you've seen Wakanda Forever, what did you think of the movie as well as my review? Do you agree? Do you disagree? That's the beauty of opinions. Let me know down in the comments below. Also, leave a like on this video, subscribe, click on the bell icon to receive all notifications from the FCHQ. That's going to be it. Have a great day, guys.